funny, isn't it? A man can sit in silence, fold his arms, and with great pride say, "I don't need money." And the room goes quiet, like he just said something wise, something noble. But you look closer, and what you see isn't peace. It's resignation, because when a man says he doesn't need money, he's usually not free from it. He's just tired of chasing it. You see, there's a kind of wisdom that looks like surrender, but it's not wisdom. It's weariness. It comes from being knocked down too many times, from asking, and being told no, from trying and watching the ground fall out beneath you again and again. So he stops asking, stops wanting, and then he calls that peace. But deep down, it's not peace. It's a kind of quiet grief, a private burial of a man's permission to build, to grow, to provide. Let me tell you something. Truly wise people, the ones who've lived, lost, earned, and kept their dignity, they never say, "I don't need money," not because they love it, not because they worship it, but because they understand what it really is. Money isn't power. It isn't status. It's not even happiness. It's permission. Permission to choose. Permission to rest. Permission to help. To leave. To stay. To say no or yes, not because you're desperate, but because it's right. You learn that. Eventually. You learn that the man who says, "I don't need money," is often the one who's secretly angry that money never came when he needed it most. You learn that when someone spits on money, it's often because they once begged for it in silence and got nothing in return. So now they claim they don't need it because it hurts less than admitting they still do. Tell me something. If you had more money, not millions, not excess, just enough to breathe deeply, would you speak differently? Would you walk into that room with your back a little straighter? Would you turn down the extra shift so you could go to your child's recital? Would you help your mother without saying, "Let me see what I can do"? Would you finally stop apologizing for how tight things are? Because that's what money is really. It's not about the yacht. It's not about the watch. It's about not flinching every time the phone rings. It's about looking someone you love in the eyes and saying, "Don't worry, I've got it covered." And wise people, they know that. They don't brag. They don't chase status. They don't need to show off, but they never dismiss money. They treat it like fire. Not to worship, but not to play with either. They know what it can warm and what it can burn. They know that a man without money is not less than, but he is more at the mercy of systems that don't care if he eats. So they build, quietly, consistently, not to prove anything, but because they've lived long enough to know freedom without resources is just a feeling, and feelings don't pay the rent. Let's pause there, because you might be thinking, "But I've never cared about money. I just want a simple life," and that's beautiful. But let me ask you, can you still live simply when things get expensive? Can you still stay calm when a medical bill shows up or the car breaks down? You see, simplicity isn't the absence of money. It's the absence of neediness. And that takes more than a mindset. It takes margin. That's why wise people stay quiet when others boast, "I don't need money." They just nod and keep building. You ever notice this? The people who say, "I don't need money," they don't say it calmly. They say it like a shield, like something they have to prove. Their voice tightens. Their eyes search the room, looking for agreement. And behind the words, there's a tremble. Not in the voice, in the soul. Because they're not just talking about money. They're talking about their own worth. Somewhere along the way, someone made them feel small. Not because they didn't have dreams, but because they couldn't afford to chase them. And instead of admitting the pain, they flipped it. They said, "Then, I don't need it." And they wore that like armor, but pride is a heavy coat. Especially when you're trying to survive summer. You see, most people don't reject money out of enlightenment. They reject it out of injury. Something happened. A father who worked 2 jobs and still came home bitter. A mother who chose between groceries and gas. A dream that fell apart because the rent was due. And the child who watched it all said, "Money is the enemy. I want nothing to do with it." That child grew up. But the belief stayed. So now they walk through life saying things like, "I don't care about being rich. All that matters is health and love. Money changes people." And none of those things are wrong. But they're incomplete, because here's the truth. Money doesn't change you. It reveals you. If you're generous, it makes you more generous. If you're afraid, it makes you more afraid. If you're free inside, it gives you more room to breathe. But if you're broken, if you're carrying a wound, it makes that wound echo louder. So no. The wise don't say, "I don't need money." They say, "I've made peace with money." And there's a difference. Because when you've made peace with something, you no longer fear it. You no longer fight it. You just understand it. And money is not a god. It's not a devil. It's a tool that will either sit unused in someone else's hands or serve your life with quiet usefulness. But first, you've got to stop pretending you're above it. Let me tell you something that took me too long to learn. Denying your need for money doesn't make you wise. It makes you vulnerable. It leaves you open to manipulation, to exploitation, to jobs you hate but can't leave, to decisions made out of desperation, not desire. And wisdom, real wisdom, doesn't leave you exposed like that. Wisdom builds a shelter. It plans ahead. It says, "I don't worship money, but I respect what it can do." So the next time someone proudly says, "I don't need money," just listen. Don't argue. Don't correct them, but listen to the story beneath their voice. Because somewhere in there's likely a moment they were made to feel unworthy. And this is how they've tried to reclaim their power. But friend, let me tell you, power doesn't come from pretending. It comes from preparing. It comes from being honest with yourself. From saying, "I do need money, not to feel important, but to take care of what matters." And that admission, that humble, grounded truth, that's where wisdom begins. I'll stop here for now. But we're not done. Next, we'll talk about the quiet price people pay when they deny their need for money, the small corners they cut, the dignity they trade, the dreams they shelf. You don't have to live that way. Let's keep walking. There's a price you pay when you tell yourself you don't need money. It doesn't come all at once. It comes slowly, quietly. Over years, you don't notice it at first. You just start to shrink. You say no to things you once dreamed of. You stay in places you've outgrown. You tolerate what used to make you ache because it feels safer than starting over. And you tell yourself, "It's fine. I don't care about money." But what you really mean is, "I've stopped asking for more because I'm tired of being let down." There's a kind of grief that hides in low expectations. It wears a smile. It sounds like modesty. But it's really fear in disguise. You don't build the business. You don't ask for the raise. You don't leave the job that's draining your soul. And the longer you stay, the harder it gets to believe that you ever had a choice. You begin to shape your world around what you can afford, not what you're called to. And every year, your dreams get a little quieter, a little smaller, until eventually they stop. Knocking altogether, that's the price of denial. Not just missed opportunities, but missed versions of yourself. Versions that could have grown, if only they had a little more room to breathe. You see, money doesn't give you meaning, but it gives you margin. And margin is where life begins to expand. It's where you say, yes, I'll take the day off. Yes, I'll help my brother. Yes, I'll go back to school. Yes, I'll move to that place where I feel alive again. But if you've told yourself you don't need money, you never even consider those options. You just keep adjusting your life to fit what you lack. Slowly, without even realizing it. You stop living by vision and start living by limitation. That's what makes this so dangerous. Because when someone says, I don't care about money, the world often praises them. They're seen as spiritual, humble, above it all. But here's the truth no one wants to say. Sometimes that humility isn't holy. It's just the scar of too many closed doors. And if you've lived long enough, you know what it feels like to be tired of knocking. But friend, you're not meant to live your whole life in survival mode. You're not meant to hold your breath every time you swipe your card. You're not meant to feel guilty for wanting to take your family on a trip or buy something without checking 5 price tags first. You're not greedy for wanting more ease. You're not shallow for wanting space. What's shallow is pretending you don't need it while quietly resenting the people who have it. Wise people don't do that. They don't lie to themselves about what they need. They don't shame others for having more. They just build slow, steady, and quiet because they know money is not the goal. But it makes goals possible. They don't let it define them. But they don't dismiss it either, and most of all, they don't deny it just to protect their pride. Because pride doesn't keep the lights on. It doesn't fill the fridge. It doesn't carry you when your knees give out and your back aches. But a little extra in the bank. So no, you don't need to worship money. But please, don't pretend you don't need it. Not for the stuff. Not for the show. But for the dignity of living a life that breathes. Next, we'll talk about something we rarely name. What money really represents for most people. And why denying it often means denying something deeper. Permission. Let's sit with that next. It takes a while to see it. But eventually, if you've lived long enough, you realize that money isn't just paper. It isn't just numbers on a screen. It's not about greed or ego or competition. It's about permission. Money gives a man permission to walk away from a toxic job, to take care of his parents when they can't walk anymore, to rest when his body is breaking, to say yes, not out of desperation, but from a place of strength. Without it, he may still survive, but he survives on someone else's terms. And that's the quiet trap. See, when people say, I don't need money, what they often mean is, I've made peace with being at the mercy of other people's choices. They don't name it that way. It's too painful. But when you don't have money, not a fortune, just enough, you have fewer ways to say no. You have fewer ways to protect your time, your energy, your voice. That's not freedom. That's dependency dressed in discipline. And wise people, they don't confuse the two. They know what it costs to live without margin. They know how quiet a life becomes when every decision starts with, can I afford this? Not, do I want this? Not, is this right? But can I afford it? That's a different kind of poverty. Not just of money, but of choice. And when your choices shrink, your life shrinks. Your world becomes a tight hallway. You say no to the invitation, the opportunity, the idea that once lit a fire in your chest, not because you lack the courage, but because you lack the cushion. And so you fold the dream in half, and then again, and again, until it's small enough to forget. That's what happens when money is missing. And that's why the wise don't deny its importance. They don't let it rule them, but they don't surrender their right to use it wisely, because they've seen what happens to people who pretend they don't need it. They've watched the compromises, the exhaustion, the quiet resignation in someone's eyes when they say, "I guess this is just how life is." But it doesn't have to be. You see, money is just a tool, but tools build doors, and doors lead to different rooms, and in those rooms are possibilities. You forgot you were allowed to want. Rest, space, a second chance, an exit plan. Money doesn't guarantee those things, but without it, you don't even get to knock. And it's not about selfishness. It's about stewardship. It's not about riches. It's about reach. You don't need to be wealthy, but you do need to be well-resourced, enough to act with integrity, enough to give without going empty, enough to live without apology. That's what money is for. Permission. Permission to live without begging, to speak without softening the truth, to walk away when something insults your soul. So when someone says, "I don't need money," I wonder, do they not need it? Or have they just lived too long without permission and forgotten what it feels like to choose? Next, we'll talk about the spiritual confusion people carry around money, how some think needing money makes you less enlightened, and why the wisest souls see money as sacred responsibility, not sinful desire. We'll meet there. Somewhere along the way, we started telling ourselves that wanting money was unspiritual, that if you were really awake, really kind, really conscious, you wouldn't care about money at all. You'd live on air. You'd give everything away. You'd let the universe provide. And so, a generation of good people quietly chose struggle as proof that they were pure. They believed lack made them holy. They believed comfort made them selfish. And slowly, they learned to feel guilty for wanting to be okay. But friend, listen to me. There is nothing enlightened about being broke. There is nothing noble about being exhausted. There is no spiritual prize for surviving every month by a thread. You are not more worthy because you suffer, and you are not less worthy if you prosper. The wise have seen this confusion before. They've seen people turn poverty into virtue, and they've seen the long, quiet suffering it creates. Because if you believe that money is bad, you will sabotage your ability to receive it. And if you think wealth makes you greedy, you will stay small to feel safe. But here's the truth. Most never say out loud, money is sacred when it's used with integrity, not sacred like a temple. Sacred like a seed. It multiplies what you plant it in. If you plant it in pride, it grows arrogance. If you plant it in fear, it grows control. But if you plant it in love, in purpose, in service, it becomes a blessing. The wise know this. That's why they don't chase money. But they don't run from it either. They welcome it. They steward it. They hold it gently, not with greed, not with guilt, but with clarity. Because they know money is not the root of all evil. That's a misquote. The love of money, the worship of it, is where evil begins. But money itself? It's neutral. It's the pen, not the story. You get to decide what it writes. So when someone tells me they've rejected money to be pure, I hear someone who was taught to confuse sacrifice with virtue. I hear someone who was praised more for struggling than succeeding, and I grieve a little for them, because I know what it's like to turn down your own comfort, your own healing, your own expansion, just to feel like a good person. But the world doesn't need more good people who are tired, broke, and quietly bitter. It needs good people who are resourced, rooted, capable. Because when the good are poor, the selfish make the rules. When the wise are struggling, the shallow take the stage. So no, rejecting money doesn't make you spiritual, but using it wisely just might. In the next part, we'll talk about one of the quietest lies of all, that you can live a big life with small resources. Let's look at that, honestly, gently, and without shame. There's a lie that doesn't shout. It whispers. You won't hear it in headlines. You won't find it on billboards. But it's there, tucked into well-meaning advice, soft-spoken quotes, quiet songs. It says, you can live a big life with small resources. And at first, it sounds beautiful. It sounds spiritual, minimal, free. But if you've tried it, truly tried it, you know, something doesn't add up. Because the truth is, a big life costs something. Not just money, but space, support, time, margin, and those things. They often begin with money. You can't pour out if you're always empty. You can't give time to your children when your schedule belongs to someone else. You can't dream wide when your every decision is cornered by lack. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of the richest lives I've seen were lived with modest means, but even they had enough. Enough to choose, enough to give, enough to breathe. There is nothing wrong with living simply. But there is something dangerous about living tight, so tight that your soul can't stretch, when you are always calculating, always compromising, always settling, not because it's right, but because it's the only option. You are not living your life. You are managing your limits. And the more you manage, the more your capacity shrinks. Until one day, your entire existence fits into a box someone else built. That's not freedom. That's just survival with nicer language. Wise people, they know better. They don't believe in the fantasy of the big life on a shoestring. Not because they don't have faith, but because they understand structure. You cannot build a wide home on a foundation meant for a tent. It will fall. Or worse, it will look strong, but leave you cold every winter. So what do the wise do? They grow their foundation, quietly, patiently, without shame. They don't rush into riches, but they prepare for more responsibility, more generosity, more opportunity. Because they know more will come. And when it does, you better be ready to hold it. You see, many people miss their moment, not because they're unworthy, but because they're unprepared. They wanted a big life, but clung to small habits, small networks, small beliefs about what they deserved. And when life finally opened the door, they were too busy managing lack to walk through it. So no, you can't live a big life on small resources. Not for long. Not without burning out. Not without breaking something important. Even simplicity takes support. Even stillness needs a cushion. And that's why the wise never say, I don't need money. Because they know it's not about greed. It's about capacity. They don't want wealth for the mansion. They want wealth for the margin. They want to be the person who says, let me help, not, I wish I could. They want to have enough, so they can live full, love freely, and stand tall, without apology, and without permission from anyone else. In the next part, we'll talk about a painful truth. How rejecting money often comes from childhood stories, the ones we heard, the ones we lived, and the ones that still echo every time a bill comes due. Let's go there, gently. You ever notice this? The ones who say, "I don't need money," are almost always the ones who've never had any, and they say it with a kind of proud defiance, as if not needing is nobler than building, as if being poor is proof of purity. But wise people, the ones who've tasted both hunger and abundance, they don't say such things because they know that money doesn't make the man, but lacking it can unmake him. They've seen what happens when good people don't have enough. Money, to the wise, is not a trophy. It's not applause. It's not a game of more. It's a tool, a shelter, a way of lifting pressure off your chest so you can finally breathe. See, it's not about greed. That's a different disease. A hungry man doesn't dream of gold-plated bathtubs. He dreams of warm food, freedom to choose, a roof that won't leak when it rains, and time with his child without clocking out. That's what money is to the wise. Not luxury, leverage. And this is where the misunderstanding begins, because the world has confused poverty with virtue and money with corruption. So people grow up ashamed of wanting it. They shrink their vision to match their wallet. They say, "I don't need money," but deep down, they wish someone would hand them the dignity they were never given. Let me tell you something you may have never been told. It's okay to want money. It doesn't make you greedy. It doesn't mean you love it more than people. It means you're tired of being helpless. Tired of counting coins while your child's school fee is due. Tired of depending on broken promises. Tired of waiting for life to be generous. The wise ones, they don't chase money, but they also don't deny its role, because they've lived long enough to know this. Lack of money can silence your voice, can bind your hands, can keep your light buried under daily survival. And that's not noble. That's just tragic. So they choose to build wealth quietly, responsibly, not to flaunt, not to dominate, but to be free. Free to help without asking. Free to walk away from abuse. Free to choose where they live, how they live, and who they become. And here's the paradox. The ones who most respect money are often the ones who need it least, because they don't worship it. They wield it like a farmer wields a tool, like a mason carries his hammer, like a healer uses herbs. Nothing sacred in the money itself, but what you do with it. That's where the wisdom shows. So when someone says, "I don't need money," ask gently, who told you that needing it was a sin? Was it a parent, a preacher, a bitter friend who failed and called it letting go? Was it pride, pretending it doesn't hurt to lack? Or shame, learned from years of going without? Because that phrase, "I don't need money," it rarely comes from peace. It often comes from pain. No. Wise people never say that. They say, "I don't worship money, but I respect what it makes possible." They say, "I've been poor, and there's no glory in it, only lessons." They say, "I use money, but I will never let money use me." And that, my friend, is the difference. One view keeps you stuck. The other sets you free. There's something else the wise understand. They know that money reveals you, not to the world, but to yourself. Because when you finally have enough, you start to see what matters, what doesn't, what you've been tolerating, and who you've really been all along. See, when you're broke, you can't always afford to be your full self. You bend, you hide, you put on a smile for the job, or nod along when your spirit wants to say no. You compromise, not because you're weak, but because you're surviving. And survival changes people. It teaches you to silence your instincts, to take what you're given, to stay quiet just to keep the little you have. But money, just enough, it starts to unlock something. Not arrogance, not ego, but a quiet return to your own voice. You stop apologizing for dreaming. You stop shrinking in rooms where you belong. You stop selling your peace for pennies. That's why the wise never shame money, because they've felt what life is like without it. They've tasted the desperation, not the movie version, the real thing, the late night arguments over bills, the silent walks home with groceries that don't stretch far enough, the sinking feeling when the car won't start, and you know no one's coming to help. They've been there. So when they speak about money, they speak with respect, not love, not lust. Just respect. They know that money is not the root of evil. It's the amplifier. It makes the generous more generous, and the selfish even louder. It doesn't create who you are. It just removes the excuses. And that's the part most people don't want to face. They say, if I had more, I'd be kinder. If I had enough, I'd help others. But when the moment comes, they do exactly what they always did, just with more means. Because character doesn't grow with your paycheck. It grows in the dark, in how you handle little, in what you do when no one's looking. Money won't change you. It will expose you. And that's why the wise prepare, not just their wallets, but their hearts. They work on who they are before the money comes, because they know wealth without wisdom is just noise. Success without soul is still empty. And money without meaning leaves you constantly chasing more. So they build slowly. From the inside out, they study themselves. They study money. They learn how it flows, how it's kept, how it's multiplied. And they do something most people forget. They plan for wealth before it arrives. That's why you won't hear them say, I don't need money. Because that phrase shuts a door. It says, I'm done learning. I've decided money's not for me. I've chosen struggle as my identity. But the wise stay open, curious, humble. They say, I'm still learning, still unlearning, still clearing space for what's possible. Because they know there's nothing noble about avoiding abundance. If you were made to multiply it, and that might be the question worth asking. Were you taught to avoid money, or to steward it, to fear it, or to grow with it, to push it away, or to let it do its quiet, necessary work? Money, after all, is just a current. It flows where it's respected. It stays where it's valued. It grows where it's understood. And the ones who whisper, I don't need money, often do so because they never learned how to hold it, or never believed they were allowed to. But you can learn. You can choose a different path, a different belief, a different rhythm. Because there is nothing small about you that needs to stay small. Not your dreams, not your vision, not your capacity. So don't be ashamed of needing money. Be honest, be open. Be willing to grow into the kind of person who can carry it well, because the world needs more of that. More good hands holding great resources. More wise hearts shaping new outcomes. And it starts with this. A shift in how you see yourself. A shift in how you see money. A shift in what you say out loud. Say this instead. I'm learning to receive. I'm learning to manage. I'm learning to prosper with purpose. That's what the wise do. By now, you might be feeling something shift, not loud, not sudden, just a quiet loosening. like a knot that's been in your chest for years, is beginning to untie. That's how truth works. It doesn't always arrive with lightning. Sometimes, it comes like a breeze, soft but undeniable. And this might be one of those truths. You were never meant to hate money, only to handle it with care. You see, hatred is heavy. And when you carry it toward money, it spills over into every decision. You sabotage your own raise. You undercharge your gifts. You turn away opportunities. Then call it not meant to be. But deep down, it's not fate. It's a belief. A quiet, deep-rooted belief that says, I'm not supposed to have more. And that belief? It was never yours to begin with. It was handed to you by someone struggling, by someone bitter, by someone who didn't know how to break the cycle. So they made peace with staying stuck. Maybe it was a parent, maybe a teacher, maybe a whole society that praised survival and whispered shame at the first sign of ambition. But just because you were given that belief doesn't mean you have to keep carrying it. The wise know this. They know how to sort through what's true and what's just tradition. They know how to hold both humility and ambition in the same hand. They know how to say, I honor where I came from, but I don't have to stay there. And maybe that's what today is about. Not chasing riches, not proving anyone wrong. Just quietly releasing the shame. The shame of wanting ease. The shame of wanting to provide. The shame of wanting room to breathe, move, and rest. There's nothing wrong with you for wanting that. In fact, it may be the most honest part of you, because you weren't made for endless tension. You weren't made to fight through every day. And money, the right amount, used in the right way, can lift that weight. Not all of it. Not the grief, not the loss, but some of the pressure. And sometimes, that's all it takes to help you start rising again. That's why the wise never say, I don't need money, because they know what that really means. They know the pain behind those words. They've lived it. They've seen the cost, and they've made a different choice. They've said, I will not define my worth by money, but I will not deny my need for it either. They've said, I'd rather be resourced and responsible than proud and powerless. They've said, I am allowed to live free from shame. Maybe you've never heard that before. So let me say it again. You are allowed to live free from shame. You are allowed to want margin. You are allowed to want choices. You are allowed to want enough. You don't owe anyone a life of struggle. Not your family. Not your culture. Not your younger self. Especially not your pride. Pride is tricky. It disguises itself as strength. But often, it's just fear with better posture. Fear of being seen as needy. Fear of being judged. Fear of having more and still not feeling worthy. But here's what the wise have learned. It's okay to want more. As long as you're willing to become someone who can carry more. That's the quiet work. That's the path worth walking. And it begins not with a strategy, but with a sentence. A simple shift in words. Not, I don't need money, but I'm ready to grow. I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to live with enough and use it well. That's not greed. That's maturity. That's wisdom. That's the voice of someone who's done making excuses, done hiding behind slogans, done pretending that lack is their identity. And maybe, just maybe, that someone as you. In the final part will sit with that idea, not as pressure, not as hype, but as a quiet invitation to come home to your own power. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout, because it's rooted. Let's meet there. So here we are, at the quiet edge of the conversation. You've listened long enough to hear what few ever stop to consider. Not just about money, but about you. About how you carry yourself in a world that's made it hard to feel safe, especially when it comes to needing more. And maybe now you see it a little clearer. This was never about greed. Never about hoarding. Never about chasing money like it's a god. It was about healing. It was about standing without flinching when life offers you more. Because sometimes poverty isn't just in your wallet. It's in your nervous system. It's in your relationships. It's in your choices. It's in the way you say, "Oh, I'm fine," when what you really mean is, "I've forgotten what free feels like." But not anymore. Not if you've really heard what's been said here. Not if, deep down, you're beginning to remember that wanting more isn't the problem. Forgetting you deserve it is. You see, the wise, they never had a problem with money. What they had was a deep understanding of what it's for. Money, when handled with clarity, is just a tool. It doesn't make you good. It doesn't make you bad. But it does make you capable. Capable of rest, of generosity, of dignity, of not having to trade your soul for survival. That's why they don't speak in extremes. That's why they don't say things like, "I don't need money," or "Money solves everything." Because they know money doesn't solve everything. But it changes the kind of problems you face. It turns desperate decisions into deliberate ones. It turns begging into building. It turns "I can't" into "let's figure it out." That's not greed. That's wisdom. And wisdom always leaves room for nuance. It knows when to say enough. And it knows when enough is still too little for the life you were meant to live. So the question now is not, do you need money? The real question is, are you ready to stop pretending you don't? Are you ready to stop performing struggle like it's a badge of honor? Are you ready to let go of inherited beliefs from voices that were just trying to survive? Because you're allowed to live differently now. You're allowed to outgrow the struggle. It starts small. Maybe you finally price your work at what it's worth. Maybe you stop laughing off your dreams just to fit in with people who gave up on theirs. Maybe you start saying, "Actually, yes, I'd love to have more than just enough." And you don't apologize for it. Because you're not chasing status. You're creating stability. You're not feeding ego. You're feeding possibility. You're not asking for luxury. You're asking for breathing room. And in a world where so many are drowning in quiet desperation, that's not selfish. That's sacred. So here's what I'll leave you with. A soft reminder. From one soul to another, you don't have to earn your worth. You already have it. But you do have to protect your future. You do have to stop giving your power away. You do have to stop pretending that being broke makes you noble. It doesn't. It makes you tired. There's nothing romantic about running on empty. There's nothing holy about choosing struggle when freedom is quietly waiting for you to stop resisting it. The wise understand this. That's why they speak gently. That's why they walk lightly. That's why they build quietly. They don't chase money, but they don't push it away either. They receive it. They respect it. They use it for good. And when someone asks, "Why do you want more?" they don't flinch. They smile. And they say something like, "So I can give more. So I can live true. So I can leave things better than I found them." And then they get to work, not to prove anything, but to honor what they've been given. If you've made it this far, I hope something inside you feels different now, not because I said anything new, but because deep down, you already knew. You were just waiting for someone to say it out loud. So here it is. One last time, you are allowed to want enough. You are allowed to rise. You are allowed to be both grounded and growing. And if this helped you see something clearer, pass it on to someone who's still sitting in the dark. They deserve to see too.